Welcome. I'm Mary Lee Hummert, Vice Provost for Faculty Development, and it's my pleasure to be here to welcome all of you from KU and also our distinguished speakers, Wendy Gillis and Golan Levin, to Navigating Digital Futures. This is one in a series of summits that began at KU in 2011-2012 and has continued over the last 3 years, and actually 4 years, and this is our 5th year of hosting these summits. They're focused on our strategic initiative themes, and this one in particular is related to our theme of harnessing information, multiplying knowledge. But it will allow us not only to focus on that particular research initiative, but digital media really is a resource in investigating the other 3 strategic initiatives as well. Those are sustaining the planet, powering the world, promoting well-being, finding cures, and building communities, expanding opportunities. And the 55 different units at KU represented here today cross all 4 of our strategic research initiatives. I want to begin by thanking our organizing committee for their work in planning this summit, and actually an unconference, as they're calling it, beginning with our chairs, Jermaine Haligua. Jermaine, please. Right. And Janelle Belmas. And the other members of the committee, Hyung So from journalism. I don't think all the names are up here. Yeah. So I'm going to go from my list. Jay Childers, Communication Studies. Patrick Miller, Political Science. Mary Jo Reef, English. Ben Rosenthal, Visual Art. Tom Volek, also from journalism. Doug Ward, journalism. Mike Williams, journalism. And also Jenny Mehmedovic from the Provost Office. I think I mentioned Hyunjin first. So I'd also like to express our thanks to Dean Ann Brill, School of Journalism, and also to Interim Dean in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Don Steeples, who also supported this and helped us put together this conference. And finally, let me acknowledge Terry Morris in the back of the room, who made sure that you all had chairs and refreshments, and you're going to have lunch today too. So I know that the committee has organized an exciting morning for you, and so I'm now going to turn the microphone over to Jermaine and Janelle. And Janelle, not Jermaine, okay. And enjoy the conference, or the unconference, as the rest of you will.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for coming out here this rainy morning. I'm so glad that the rain didn't dampen all of our attendance. Today what we're going to do is go for the goal. The goal of this conference is to bring together faculty and students who are currently interested in or working on areas of research in digital media, or that use digital media in some way as a critical component of their work. We are hoping that through the discussion and collaboration, we can create working groups and push our knowledge and our expertise and our collaboration further. We also know that a lot of you probably don't know each other. The idea here is to gather people together who may not know each other, but who have different interests and different expertises in ways that collaborators, to create collaborations that could be funded through external foundations. So, again, as Mary Lee said, there are 55 units here represented on campus. We were supposed to, as you look in your program, go around and try to introduce each other, but we were delighted to find out that we really had too many people to do that. So we hope that through the small groups that will break in after our guest speakers, we'll be able to do that. All right? So this is what you all provided when you talked about your keywords as to what you might be interested in. We're impressed at the number of topics and also the number of commonalities that are in this word cloud. The idea here is to get our guest speakers to give us a kickstart, and we will be breaking into groups, and we'll be talking about particular different topics. All right? So Germaine will talk about, after our speakers, she will talk a little bit about how an unconference works. That may be weird or a little different to some of you, but trust me, it's going to be really cool. All right. So, thank you again. I hope the day is productive for you. I'd like to introduce my colleague Hinjin to introduce Wendy.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Wendy Gillis, President and CEO of the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. The Kauffman Foundation is one of the largest private foundations in the U.S. and focuses grant making on operation on education and entrepreneurship. Wendy joined the Kauffman Foundation in 2000 and has since played an instrumental role in building the foundation's local, national, and global reputation as a leader and innovator in education and entrepreneurship. I first met Wendy in 2013 when she graciously agreed to allow our students in a capstone class to work with the Kauffman Foundation and Union Station, Kansas City, to develop communication strategies for Maker Faire, Kansas City. Wendy and her team inspired our students with Kauffman's vision for innovation and their thoughtful commitment to education. Among her accomplishments, Wendy developed, launched, and oversaw the growth of one of the foundation's most significant and far-reaching initiatives in Global Entrepreneurship Week, now in its 8th year, and involving a big effort in Kansas City and in communities in 100 countries around the world. Today, Wendy will share key lessons learned in entrepreneurship and other areas that will be most applicable to working on digital media and fostering cross-disciplinary innovation and collaboration. Please help me welcome Kauffman Foundation President and CEO, Wendy Gillis.
Thank you, Hinjin, and good morning, everyone. It's really exciting for me to be here today, and I do appreciate the invitation to come speak with you. You know, this meeting is called the Digital Futures Summit, but in a sense, it's more like a base camp on the way to the summit. We're here to talk about an adventure that is just beginning in fields that are still very new, despite the vast amount of work that's already been done in them. Digital media, data analysis, and all the possible offshoots and combinations of those disciplines are like computing itself. They're becoming universal. They can be applied to practically anything. We've seen how they're already changing fields from journalism to healthcare to the arts. They're changing how we learn and how we do business. They're changing how we live. And certainly there are bumps along the road. Disruptive technologies cause disruption. Maybe there are times when we let our smartphones take us away from what's right in front of us. Anyone who speaks in public has gotten used to seeing people glued to their devices while they listen, and you don't know if they're looking up facts related to your talk or playing Candy Crush. But those disruptions are all part of a massive experiment that's still in its very early stages. What we're really seeing with new uses of digital technology are people in every part of the world experimenting with new ways to be in the world. And you're at the vanguard of the movement here at this base camp. The digital applications and content you create are already enabling people to expand how they think and live. Some of them could turn out to be difference makers, though I don't know which ones. It's hard to predict what the next big things will be in these fields. You have the creativity and the knowledge to conceive ideas that many of us, including me, can barely imagine. But I will share some observations that might help you explore what to do with your ideas. If you want to take some next steps, there are a few simple messages that might help illuminate the path. They come from our work in entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation. But first, I'd like to share with you a few key traits of successful entrepreneurs. The first is a passion for the ideas they're cultivating and the businesses they're creating. Entrepreneurs are sometimes perceived as fortune seekers or compulsive risk takers, but in fact, the good ones work pretty hard at systematically minimizing risk. And while they're glad to make money, that is rarely the primary motivation. They're people who love what they do, which is why they're so willing to work hard at it. Time and again, they speak of the intrinsic rewards of recognizing a need or opportunity and then developing an idea to meet it. Which brings up the second key trait. Entrepreneurs want their work to have an impact in the world. They're not content with making discoveries or proving concepts. They want to put their ideas into practical form and put them into the hands of people who can use them to become more effective or happier. I believe that a lot of you here today share that desire, that you want your work to have an impact beyond publishing the research results. And one classic way to do that is through entrepreneurship. This means starting an ongoing venture to bring your idea, plus future ideas, into the world in useful form. The venture can be a for-profit company like Google or Pixar, or it can be a nonprofit enterprise like Wikipedia, and there are many ways to go about getting one started. You can take the lead as the founder or co-founder, or you can team up with other people to take the lead in organizing and running the venture while you become an onboard expert or advisor. That's an attractive choice for people who want to maintain their academic careers because you can continue to participate within a defined role. Our founder, Ewing Kauffman, used to say that his greatest contribution to society was not any philanthropic gift. It was the pharmaceutical company he created in 1950, Marion Laboratories. Over the next 4 decades, until it was acquired and merged, Marion brought waves of useful healthcare products to the public, employed thousands of people, and generated the wealth that made civic ventures like the Kauffman Foundation possible. To be part of an enterprise that keeps on generating and contributing, whether on a mass market scale or a special niche, is deeply rewarding. I suspect that many of you in this room are driven by that very same desire to make a contribution to the world that lives on and improves lives. And now for the messages. I have 3 practical insights to share from our work with entrepreneurs that may be useful on your path. They all debunk a myth that's sometimes believed about entrepreneurs and about creative people generally, and that's the myth of the solitary genius. Successful entrepreneurs do not work alone or in isolated small groups. In fact, if there's one further trait that distinguishes them, other than a passion for their work or a desire to make a difference, it's their inclination to reach out. They network across boundaries, they get input from many sources, and they're able to draw people with different skills and assets into their loop. So then message number 1 is cross-disciplinary work is essential. It's often said that new ideas flourish best at the edges, where disciplines and people interact, and the emerging digital fields are prime examples. We can't have the digital humanities without a combination of digital expertise and expertise in the humanities, and not everyone has deep knowledge of both. Just about every digital arts venture employs a mixture of computer scientists and visual artists, along with people who span the 2 areas. What's especially interesting is the growth of efforts to institutionalize cross-disciplinary work in the digital fields. There are major nonprofits like Code for America, which puts coders together with local government officials to aggregate and analyze data that will help deliver services or do regional planning more effectively. You'll hear from Golan Levin, who directs one of several large cross-disciplinary centers at Carnegie Mellon. And I'm guessing that all of you here in journalism have heard about the Night Lab at Northwestern University, which is a joint venture between the journalism and engineering schools to develop new software tools and technology for the digital media. Again, these new fields are so universal in their application that I can't even begin to go into the many different possibilities for collaboration across disciplines. Just in areas related to the biological sciences, we're seeing an immense diversity of new digital ventures. They range from iVerify in Kansas City, which provides a digital ID and security by reading a unique biometric signature, which are the patterns of the blood vessels in the whites of your eyes, to Apple's new Research Kit, a set of tools that enable medical and health research by gathering data from the biosensors in iPhones that are carried by research subjects. In education, we at the Kauffman Foundation have a project called EdWise, which aggregates deep data on school districts so that planners and policymakers can analyze it for trends that might suggest how to improve effectiveness. Plus, we're constantly looking at how to use the web and social media to deliver entrepreneurship content and programs. Our work brings us into collaboration with all kinds of people outside of the foundation, and that leads to the second key message I'd like to share with you. Reach out beyond your four walls to break down silos. This one is aimed expressly at entrepreneurs and innovators in the university setting. From where you are, working across disciplines is necessary, but not sufficient. We at the Foundation have found that it's also essential to reach out beyond the university, building connections and working relationships in the so-called real world. Just one example. A few years ago, there was a research study addressing the question, why do we have so few female high-tech entrepreneurs? The researchers surveyed female faculty in the life sciences at various universities. They found that on a per capita basis, the women were performing and publishing research that was equal to or better than the work of their male colleagues, as measured by the journal Impact Factor. Yet the women lagged far behind the men in patenting and licensing, which in the life sciences are crucial first steps to startup activity. Now, why would this be? One finding was that men, on average, were simply much better connected to people outside the university. They were far more likely than the women to sit on science advisory boards of private companies or startups. They were more aware of what the market needed, in which forms, and they knew people who could help them develop it. Even at the very early stages of research, if they were working on something they thought might have practical use, the men were able to pick up the phone and call people in the private sector to ask basic questions like, here's what I'm finding out. What do you think it could lead to? For whatever reasons, most of the women did not have these kinds of connections. As we put it at Kauffman, they were isolated inside glass walls at the university, and it may have been that glass wall effect, more than any glass ceiling, that kept them from moving ahead with their ideas. This now appears to be changing, which is good news. Women in science are becoming better connected, but the message is still the same for men and women alike. The best university innovators make connection beyond the university. If you want your research to have real-world impact, it starts with real-world contact. And we're talking about more than the typical forms of contact. Faculty researchers often work with users or research subjects outside universities. They test software at private companies or on the internet. Social scientists conduct experiments in actual communities, and real-world student projects are part of the curriculum in most departments. All of this is very helpful. Yet to innovate really well, other levels of connection are needed. As a life science example showed, it's important just to have people to bounce ideas around with you at the formative stage. People who are out in the world of practical application can help university researchers to modify and build on their great ideas, perhaps steer their work in more promising directions, or even suggest entirely new needs that the research could meet. What we're talking about is contact with the marketplace, with the people and organizations that operate in it every day. My third and final key message is that the market is not just an arena where you can sell what you make. Woo. In a very real sense, it's the world itself, a place that you can and should look to as you conceive, shape, and develop your work. There is a real need out there for innovators who can come up with ideas that help existing organizations migrate into the new digital world. Let me mention just a few that are very close to where we're now meeting. In Kansas City, one of our flagship companies is Hallmark Cards. As you know, Hallmark has thrived for years by making greeting cards and other physical gift products. Now, of course, Hallmark has an e-card line plus online services that let you create and order your own customized greeting cards, gift books, and other novelty items. But what's next for Hallmark? What else could this company be doing in digital media or related areas? We also have Sprint in Overland Park and Garmin in Olathe, two companies with their very roots in telecom and digital applications. What's next for them? Will they continue to evolve in new directions? And what about the aircraft companies in Wichita? Not only do older established companies license new technologies, they're also prime customers of startup companies, which can serve as suppliers of new goods and services for them. Often they may invest in or acquire these ventures, as Google acquired YouTube. Governments and public agencies are also major investors in and clients of people with new ideas. In short, the market beckons. There are people who would be eager to see our new ideas now if you could develop them into forms that are useful to them. And the most market-worthy forms may not be apparent at first. Warfarin, the first medical blood thinner for reducing the risk of stroke, was originally developed in an ag lab at the University of Wisconsin by researchers who were trying to make a rat poison that would exterminate small pests by bleeding them without hurting larger animals. H&R Block in Kansas City was started after World War II as a bookkeeping service for small businesses. The Block brothers would occasionally do personal tax returns for the business owners, and they actually wanted to get out of that sideline until a friend suggested there might be a wider need for help with tax returns, and we all know what happened next. The market beckons, and it helps to be connected with it. If you should decide to start a venture around your idea, the needs for connections only multiply. You'll want access to people who can provide mentorship and talents for staffing the startup, and entree to clients and partners, along with funding for the venture, of course. At the foundation, we're finding that entrepreneurs in general need more than a bit of personal effort devoted to networking. They need entire communities of support, which are made up of people with all kinds of skills and experiences, including fellow entrepreneurs. One of our most successful programs at the foundation is a very simple one called 1 Million Cups. It was based on the notion that entrepreneurs and people interested in entrepreneurship would build networks and launch new ideas just by having 1 million more cups of coffee together. So we started a 1 Million Cups program in Kansas City. It's an open meeting over coffee every week where entrepreneurs present their business plans and discuss ideas among a crowd of their peers, mentors, and other business people. There are now 1 Million Cups meetings in more than 70 cities across the country, including right here in Lawrence. The co-organizers include people from the KU Entrepreneurship Program and the private sector. It's a great place to start making connections. The charter meeting in Kansas City is still going strong too, so you can visit both. You can bounce ideas around, hear other people's ideas, and get access to more resources for boosting you on your way. So the bottom line is very simple as well. As I've looked back on our years of working in entrepreneurship at the foundation, I see big breakthroughs and transformative ideas come from collaboration and networking. And I would urge you to chart your path forward by reaching out. Share your ideas. Listen to other people's. Build bridges across disciplines and across sectors to get the intellectual expedition moving in directions that can have the greatest impact. This base camp is an excellent place to begin. There are many summits waiting to be climbed. Thank you for listening.
Hi. We're just going to set up Roland's computer here for a second.
Could have warned you.
It wakes them up.
That's right. I need a moment to make sure that I have this thing mirrored. Okay, but is it mirrored? Good. And actually, I'm going to begin with this article I found yesterday. Great.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be able to introduce Golan Levin, who's an associate professor of electronic time-based media at Carnegie Mellon University School of Art, where he's been since 2004, and where he also serves as director of the Studio for Creative Inquiry, one of the country's premier interdisciplinary arts research centers. He received his bachelor's in art and design from MIT, and his graduate work was also conducted at MIT in the renowned Media Lab. Golan's pioneering work as an artist and researcher explore new modes of interactive expression and nonverbal communication. Via performances, responsive artifacts, and virtual environments, he engages creative twists to digital technologies that highlight our relationship with machines and expand the vocabulary of human action and awaken participants to their own potential as creative actors. His current research, a form of speculative human-computer interaction, explores the artistic potential of interactive robots, gesture analysis and synthesis, and the theme of gaze as a primary new mode for human-to-artwork communication. His work has been exhibited in prestigious venues and exhibitions all over the world, and just to name a tiny fraction, at the Whitney Biennial, Bitform's Gallery in New York, the New Museum in New York, the ZKM Museum in Karlsruhe, Germany, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and many times at what we would consider the Oscars of the media art world, the Prix Arts Electronica in Linz, where his work has consistently been awarded honorable mentions and awards of distinction. So in other words, he's a rock star. I'd like you to join me in welcoming Golan Levin.
Hi, Ben. Thank you, and thank you so much, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me here today. Can you all hear me okay? That's great. Can we throw up the slides? Are they there? What's that? Oh, it's mirrored. I'm so sorry. Yeah. My bad. The slides are, it's just because I have this one special thing. It's all good. Yeah, this should be. It's not on mirror. I'll just mirror it and I'll deal. I'm so sorry. Not her fault, mine. It's good. Let's throw this on mirror for a second. There we go. I'm so sorry. Actually, it's because I went off script. This is from like literally yesterday, from Nature magazine, and or Nature Journal, if you like, and they had this summary of interdisciplinary research by the numbers, and I thought I would share it with you because it's kind of interesting. Just going to move this over here so I can see you and the computer. And so they did this kind of longitudinal survey of interdisciplinary articles from lots and lots of journals just to figure out what their impact was. And it's an interesting study that I kind of recommend. I can't recommend highly enough. So the interesting thing is basically 3 years after publication, articles that you would describe as interdisciplinary measured in a couple different ways, yellow and purple. Yellow and purple is variety, the spread of references, and yellow is disparity, the intellectual distance between the cited disciplines. So 3 years after publication, interdisciplinary articles have a seemingly less impact. They're less cited. And so the more interdisciplinary it is, it's on the right-hand side, it seems to be cited less. And so you go, oh, okay. Well, the real reason is that people don't know what to do with this stuff yet. It's just so far thinking. 13 years after publication, there's much more impact, significantly more impact. And in the long term, citations rise sharply when a paper is bringing together these different kinds of topics. So you can see that basically interdisciplinary thinking is kind of a long game. And I guess maybe the first point I'd like to make, because this is just hot off the presses from yesterday, but the point I'd like to make is that we can play a long game here at universities, longer than they can play in industry, for example. And I think that in defending interdisciplinary thinking and interdisciplinary work, we should not necessarily look to the short term, but to the long term. Now, I'm a new media artist by profession and by training, and for those of you who don't really know what that necessarily means, it's an artist who uses technology as my primary sort of artistic medium. I write software in order to make art. So I've learned all the tools and techniques of computer science, not all of them, but I've learned some of them, in order to basically produce poetic and expression and to make new culture. That's really what I'm about. And so for that reason, I'm going to switch over to the slides. And let's see here, gather windows. I'm going to go back to this. Beg your patience for a moment while I unmirror, get my notes. We're good. And close that and slip over to my slides. All right. Hi. That's me. No, that's good. Thanks for your patience there. So let's see. For people who do what I do, I mean, often it ends up sort of, you can think of it as in the very near term, my game is sort sort of exploring the aesthetic potential of new media, these kinds of tools and techniques that have come down the pike that have sort of landed in my lap from computer science laboratories or from entrepreneurial industries, and thinking about just what are the cultural potentials, what are the aesthetic potentials. But really, it's more important to recognize that there's kind of a feedback between culture and technology, that technologies enable new forms of culture, and that culture actually sort of sets the agenda or the timetable or the fiction that we sort of aspire to for new technologies. And so part of my job as a new media artist is actually to, in a certain sense, predict the future and predict the impact of the technologies on culture that these technologies are having that maybe not everyone sees in their desire to sort of go for new kinds of business success. Well, it's great that we're doing that, but where is it taking us? And I believe artists can have a really important role in doing so, and should really have a role at the table in terms of setting and understanding technological agendas. This is me. I'm kind of a liminal character within Carnegie Mellon. I teach across a lot of different departments. My home department's in the School of Art, but I work across design, computer science, entertainment technology. And as I'll be mentioning in this talk, I also direct this kind of loose piece, which is the Studio for Creative Inquiry. Ben was very kind. He said it's one of the premier laboratories for interdisciplinary arts research. It's easy to be one of the premier laboratories when there are so few of them. The real truth is that laboratories like mine often come and go very quickly. When times are good, people start investing in research, and when times are even better, they're able to tolerate arts research, right? And then as budgets shrink, these labs come and go. My lab's very fortunate; it's been around since 1989, which makes it practically Paleolithic. But I've been director since 2009. So I teach studio art courses in computer science or arts engineering, in which the medium is software written by the students, but the objective is cultural work, art, design, provocation, poetry, social critique, or innovation in ways for which you don't really have names yet. So my courses are often what I would call one-room schoolhouses, which is maybe understandable if you're out here on the prairie. I'll have students from 9 or 10 different disciplines gathered under the same roof. I'll have art, architecture, design, drama, music, human-computer interaction, computer science, robotics, various kinds of engineering, all taken together. And what sometimes really amazes my colleagues in more technical disciplines, I'll have everything from freshmen through doctoral students in the same class. And part of the way to do something like that is to sort of flip the classroom and get the students teaching each other. Otherwise, it's not meaningful to have such different levels in the class. But if the students are also helping you teach each other, then you can really pull it off well. And I want to say that I take as my starting point the idea that software programming is an essential 21st century skill. And so, although it's often the case that in industry, especially, we direct people to learn how to work on interdisciplinary teams or so-called Renaissance teams, I'm personally more interested in helping breed Renaissance individuals. Designers who can code, engineers who have a kind of a cultural bone. And so, although every one of my students is expected to write code, even if they're, primarily a painter by self-identification, regardless of their background, my students write code in a zoo of different computer programming languages. A given assignment might have responses ranging from everything from Adobe Flash to MATLAB in terms of the kinds of ways people respond to what they do. So arts-oriented students learn the skills, what you might call computational thinking skills, or even software engineering sometimes, in order to implement their concepts in real working forms. There's really nothing like a prototype and actual making to kind of reinforce that. And meanwhile, science and engineering students get in touch with a way of operating in culture that maybe isn't necessarily encouraged. There's a problem often in computer science classes, not all, but many, that they fail to reach certain kinds of students. Maybe you know this if you've dropped out of a computer science course like many of my students have, where those kinds of courses fail to address the interests of students who would rather work on things that are expressive rather than functional. They fail to address the learning styles of students who learn from concrete examples rather than from abstract principles. And they also fail to address culturally the modes of practice where someone works improvisationally rather than according to a fixed plan. So, artists are accustomed to sort of changing the goals halfway through the project if things aren't going the way they like. That's much less the case in industry where you're expected that your boss or your client is going to hand you a piece of paper with the sort of the spec, and you have to build that. Arts and science students, the science and engineering students are often kind of, in my classes, provoked to apply their skills to questions that are driven by their curiosity, their passion, their senses, even their politics, to problems which may be more personal, speculative, or whimsical, and whose solutions are less provably correct. They're invited to have a point of view. Some of them have never been asked, what would you like to make? And having this liberty is the rare privilege of being in school. And for many of my science and engineering students, it may be the last time they're ever asked that kind of question for a while. I sometimes find it helpful to think about my work in these three axes. Generally one is fortunate if you can accomplish any two out of these three. And I happen to locate myself along the sort of bottom of this triangle. One interesting reason why I do so is, again, taking the long game, working within the university. There's actually a heck of a lot of people who are already working up at the top, right? So it's really well-trammeled territory, right? And there's like so many people interested in money that it's just like, like they're carving up, like splitting hairs in terms of like thinking about all the different kinds of ways they can try. So which means there's this enormous territory down below where there's like exploratory stuff that, paths that haven't been taken yet. And that to me is the essence of research. And you could call this, in a sense, inventing culture. Another way that I work is, whereas knowledge production is usually carried out through publication of papers, influencing culture is often carried out through the dissemination of provocative or sublime examples. And so my students produce examples to kind of inspire what people think is possible or where culture could go. So to be sure, one is concerned with producing reproducible results, but the other is with providing a change in perspective and stimulating new goals and even asking new questions. The things I make are as useful as a song. And if you think to yourself about maybe your favorite song and how bereft you would be if it were suddenly taken away from you, that's kind of the kind of way I'd like to use technology, is to make things that are as useful as your favorite song. Sometimes it actually just requires a simple change in perspective to imagine how to alter what would otherwise be a technical demo into something that actually has kind of soaring poetry. So I thought I'd show some examples of what that could mean. A lot of what I do is apply existing kind of technological principles to the creation of new culture, as I've explained. And here's one project called Double Taker. It's a large robot, kind of a poetic surveillance system that lives on top of a museum, sort of halfway between Big Brother and Sesame Street. And it basically is a robot which is designed to produce the impression that it's continually surprised to see you. It's a repurposed robot arm from a Detroit factory, and basically kind of scans you up and down. It does basically what you call a double take. It like looks at you and kind of inspects you. It'll sometimes move as you do if it detects your patterns. It'll look back and forth between you and your friend if you're there with a friend. And just scan you up and down, sometimes look away, and then come back as if like maybe you missed something. And in this way, it attempts to communicate the idea that maybe there's something in all of us that's worth a second look. This is what it sees. Eye, trying to find the moving things, we're looking at them. Focus of attention. In the lower right, you can see its own self-concept, its image of where it thinks it's pointing. About 800 pounds, and it's weatherproof. It's up there for a summer. Here it is with kids. I'll skip this video. Checking them out. Okay, so that's some of my own work in robotics. I'd now like to talk a bit about the Studio for Creative Inquiry that I direct. Recently endowed by Ed Frank and his wife Sarah Ratchey. The studio is kind of a loose piece within Carnegie Mellon. It's technically a unit of the College of Fine Arts under the directorship of our dean, or administrative directorship of our dean. It's I guess you'd call it the research laboratory of the College of Fine Arts, but we actually support people from all over the university. I have a space, it's about 1,700 square feet, and it's a multi-purpose, flexible workspace that we use for all kinds of things, including lectures and workshops, and this is, people doing stuff, learning technologies. We use it for exhibitions, lectures, symposia, concerts, conferences, performances, what have you. It's a lot of other things too, though. In addition to this kind of sort of space for doing collaborative work and having these kinds of outreach activities, it's a center for experimental enterprises across Carnegie Mellon University. It's a meta lab that connects resources from basically, which connects arts research to any conceivable resource within the university context that I can connive my way into accessing. And our mission, which I think is really important, and I plucked this out of thin air, is to support atypical, antidisciplinary, and interinstitutional research and educational initiatives, I should say, at the intersections of art, science, technology, and culture. So that's what we're trying to do. I think a key word here is antidisciplinary. Sometimes I'm fond of saying to my students, I believe in discipline, but not disciplines. It's basically about having rigor, but actually not necessarily obeying the kinds of walls that have been erected that actually prevent new kinds of thinking from emerging. So we do a variety of different kinds of things. One thing we do is we support faculty, staff, and student research. We have an endowment that produces around $50,000 a year. We used to give out small grants that range from as little as $50 to as much as $5,000 or $10,000. Those go to faculty, staff, and students. We have a program of micro grants, for example. Students can walk in and basically walk out with up to $500 to produce so-called art at the frontier, whatever that might be. They have to articulate in their own terms what frontier they're working at. And it's not exclusively the technological frontier, but it often is. We also provide administrative support to faculty, staff, and students in terms of payroll and purchasing, grant writing, and assistance with fundraising, primarily to people in the College of Fine Arts, but actually everywhere beyond the CFA as well. We also host interesting visitors. We're a center for hosting artists in residence. These are generally externally funded with grants, and we bring them to conduct research and create new work, to involve and inspire our community, to provide work experience for students, and as research collaborators for CMU projects. They keep things fresh because otherwise we're tenured up to the teeth, and it's really nice to bring in people, because we're not in a coastal situation, to kind of hear different voices. We also, as I mentioned, produce conferences and symposia and other kinds of lectures and workshops and other kinds of events. And more generally, because of my role, I end up serving on a lot of interdisciplinary committees, and we advocate for interdisciplinary education throughout the university and creating new kinds of contexts like courses and conferences to help this. How we do it, I can't really tell you, but I can tell you that because we have almost no money, we actually have a huge amount of license to take big risks. So actually, it's kind of the advantage of sort of not being on the radar. I'm not controlling huge budgets. The complete budget of our lab is around $250,000 a year, and so no one really gives if it gets too complicated. And so I have a lot of rope, enough rope to hang myself with, if you will. And as you'll see, some of the projects we do, in fact, do touch interesting kinds of controversies, and I think it's really important for furthering research, as we'll see. Some examples of outreach projects, primarily directed by me at the intersection of art and technology, are different kinds of conferences we've directed that encourage learners from the arts and humanities to learn how to code, doing things like data visualization and physical computing and other kinds of experiments in interactive arts. This is one of our events, for example, involving a pretty wide public. These are students who are learning how to program for the first time. Ages represented here are everything from about 12 to 70. This was a conference that we did on a couple of years ago on 3D sensing and visualization. Kind of getting people to explore the new possibilities of the Kinect, just as it was released by Microsoft, probably a month after it was public. And we have a lot of kinds of research. We've got 25 years of research projects, again, primarily in art and technology, but going back quite a ways. And so I thought I'd show one or two of those as well. So here's a project from an artist in residence. It's what's called a poetic robotic system, a robotic couch. And Jacob developed this during the summer with in collaboration with folks from our Robotics Institute and from our sculpture area.
Relationships are a balancing act, and they're a delicate one. I chose to work with a sofa for this project because the full range of human social interactions can be found on sofas. From dinner to chatting to job interviews to sex, sofas are these ubiquitous, often very humble things built by man to facilitate social interaction. Is it any wonder that their footing is so solid when they're made to support these delicate structures we build of relationships prone to falling apart and falling down? The sofa I used for this project was an early Victorian transitional piece manufactured in the 1840s. I found it tattered and broken in the back of a coffee shop in a rural American town. The basic mechanism which balances the sofa is known as a reaction wheel. It is a design commonly used to reorient satellites in space. A second axis added to the mechanism allows the sculpture to balance on a single point.
No one likes it when relationships fall apart, but it is an ever-present possibility. In the undesirable event that someone knocks the sculpture over, separate pieces of the sofa are held together with strong magnets, and the energy of a fall is dissipated by the pieces of the sofa pulling apart. As in life, the risk here is real, rather than illusory. The sculpture can fall and break to pieces, which must then be picked up, possibly repaired, and put back together one at a time.
It's then stood up manually into a nearly balanced position from where it seeks out an ideal center of equilibrium on its own.
So you're looking at a sculpture in a way which, first of all, students and staff and others were involved in helping Jacob create it. He came to me with a sketch and said, "I want to make this," and I was like, "That's awesome! You should come to CMU and do it." And I think it's really important to say, he's not necessarily inventing patentable technologies here. As you can see, he's using something called a reaction wheel, which has been well known in astronautics for 50 years. So he's just kind of applying it or doing technology transfer, if you will, to the kind of cultural domain to make what I think is undeniably a kind of a new form of cultural expression, and something that hasn't been seen before. We've done a bunch of things just building on the strengths of CMU. We have a particular strength in robotics. You have other strengths here in Kansas, and so we sort of cannibalize or take advantage of those strengths where we can in order to make new forms with what we have. We make lemonade with the lemons we have, and so we have this fantastic Robotics Institute, and another one of our visiting artists engaged the researchers there in thinking about what it could mean for two robots to have a kind of social relationship. In this case, one robot is a performer, one robot's an observer. There's one robot dancing and another robot responding to it in observing it by sort of expressing through its posture whether it's interested or not in what the dancing robot is doing. So the two robots are in a kind of a feedback. The dancing robot is dancing, the observer robot is observing it by its posture, communicating whether it's interested or not. And the dancing robot accommodates, attempting to ingratiate itself with the observer. So, total feedback between the two robots, just to explore this kind of poetic system. So, computer graphics, another area of research of ours. This is a project that was developed, started at the studio for Creative Inquiry, and involved a former student or recent alumnus and a visiting artist who, at the conference I mentioned earlier about 3D sensing and visualization, began to think about what it could mean to use the Kinect, the Microsoft Kinect, which was launched into the market as a game controller, actually as a tool for creating documentary video. They began to develop something called the RGBD Toolkit, a toolkit for recording RGBD video. That's red, green, and blue, like standard camera imaging, and depth, which is what the Kinect gives you. And they developed this open source toolkit that's now been widely used by thousands of other artists around the world to produce something called clouds. and it's the world's first interactive generative 3D documentary film featuring interviews with 40 different leaders in media arts and computational design who are each talking about their particular relationship to code. Here is Brian Eno. Others interviewed include Bruce Sterling and Paola Antonelli. And I thought I'd show a quick clip of Clouds. It's entirely recorded with a Microsoft Kinect sensor lashed to a standard DSLR camera, and they produced 40 hours of interviews. But unlike most documentary films that might be half an hour in length, Clouds is actually of infinite duration. The 40 hours of interviews were cut up into richly tagged little fragments, and a story engine generates a narrative between them according to the user's interests. So it's actually, the documentary is an executable or an application. When you double click on it, it launches, and you can pursue a path through the sort of topic space that these 40 different interesting leaders are talking about. Here's a bit what it looks like. And this is just a kind of a quick video grab.
With programming, it's you can do whatever you want. At some point, I wouldn't say biblical, but it's like there's nothing in the beginning, or just as you have in history, it's just an empty space, and then you can start throwing things in there.
Well, what I want to do, I want to program like I can paint. So, like 10 years ago, I painted a lot, and I want to get the same feeling with code.
There's so many things that you want to do that you could do by hand. It would take you a long time, but if like programming just increases your capabilities, almost exponentially.
I addicted myself, and I'm highly addicted to programming. You can't stop me. Sometimes I forget to eat. Sometimes I forget to sleep. And I don't know, can you turn a pickle back into a cucumber? Probably not. So I'm here for life. You've got me. It's terminal.
This adding and taking away, that's kind of the design process now. I still feel in control, but I like to be surprised. I think that's the beauty of it. The thing when the system goes beyond what you naturally understand it to do, and sometimes you have something that surprises you. And I always look for that one moment.
You get to a point in large visualizations where it's just actually too much data to look at as a flat image, and you have to do some sort of zooming or flying through navigation to get to focus on some small part of it, because there's so many examples of this, like a huge parabolic connection where it means nothing at some point.
And he is basically explaining how the database works. And he says that there's one point here, and then you go around, and then there's another audio sample there, and another one there, and because this is closer to it, this is the one which is matched. He explains everything like that.
Is there an experience, a digital experience that you desire to have?
Yes, direct transportation. Yeah, there are many things.
So as you can see, it portends a kind of a new sort of cinema in which scenography is actually computed in post-production. Right? Once you've recorded people in the round in a way, in 3 dimensions, you can view them from any perspective later on, and generate a kind of a traversal not just through the topic space, but through the physical space that you can invent from the materials you've recorded. I'm going to briefly now show a few other projects that have come out of the Studio for Creative Inquiry that maybe illustrate the breadth of what we mean by interdisciplinary thinking and antidisciplinary thinking, but also allow for some of the kinds of controversies that we're comfortable brewing. When I first inherited or became the director of the studio, I was sort of upset with the name. I was like, Studio for Creative Inquiry, what's that? It's like, I really want to call it like the Center for Art and Technology. And as a few years have passed, I've kind of come to feel really lucky about the name, because it allows the widest possible kind of approach towards new culture and new exploration and arts research. I don't really have to worry about whether what someone does is legitimately within the scope of the unit if it's still interesting work. So, for example, we've done a number of projects which engage local communities in thought-provoking ways. There's a project by Professor Kim Beck. It's a skywriting project in which she's taken slogans from sort of the collapse of commerce and written them up in the sky, sort of, last chance, on sale, going soon, big sale, this kind of thing, kind of projected up into a kind of large public space. There's a project by Jill Miller, a visiting artist who, visiting professor, I should say, who made something called the Milk Truck. It's kind of a mobile space for breastfeeding, kind of political gesture. You could call this or tweet it, and it would come and basically provide you with a nice place to breastfeed. This is a project that's kind of well known in Pittsburgh and potentially outside. It's called Conflict Kitchen, and it's a restaurant that exclusively serves cuisine from regions of the world that with which the United States is in conflict. There's a lot of them, so we're never short for ideas. And this is by Professor John Rubin and Don Walesky, a former student. And the restaurant changes nationalities every 3 or 4 months. Here it was Afghani food. Here it was Iranian takeout. Here it's Venezuelan takeout. And the food comes wrapped in these kinds of wrappers that tell stories, cross-cultural stories of different perspectives of Venezuelan Americans in the United States talking about back home, of interviews with Venezuelans in Venezuela. One of the interesting things, the food is really good. The food is so good because actually it's prepared by a chef who left one of Pittsburgh's top restaurants in order to become a vendor of street food. His perk is that he gets to travel to these crazy places to actually, interview people's grandmothers about how to prepare beans and really get to understand the culture. They're coming out with a cookbook soon. But it's really incredibly well researched. And he goes, the only place they weren't able to get into was North Korea, but he interviewed North Korean expatriates in Seoul. Otherwise, the staff of this restaurant has visited all these different regions. Most notably and most controversially, Palestine a few months ago, leading to death threats when Palestinian food was sold to the public. Projects which literally reconstruct urban fabric. This is my beautiful city. It's Pittsburgh. It's basically a triangle between 3 rivers. And smack in the middle of that triangle, sort of right in the center there, is our tallest building, which used to be the U.S. Steel Tower. Now it's owned by the largest hospital, UPMC. And unlike a lot of cities where there's sort of, they take the highest point, like say Chicago, and put an observatory there, or other kinds of cities like New York, where we can recover urban infrastructure and make it into kind of a beautiful tourist place, or a kind of just a place to kind of see the city from a different perspective. This is what the roof of our tallest building looks like. It turns out to be the tallest point between New York and Chicago, so one of our visitors basically engaged the Carnegie Mellon community, our business people, our urban planning people, our architecture students, and our engineering faculty in a wide sort of ranging study as to how we could actually build a kind of a visitor center up there. It's a feasibility study that was conducted in every single respect, economically, architecturally, engineering-wise. And this is currently what the roof of this place looks like, but this is its view. And so a wide variety of ideas were generated. 34 student teams organized to kind of to think about a student proposed park. They just kind of get to reimagine the city. The proposals on the table were we're in negotiations with the folks who own the building. It's complex, but it's the kind of thinking that we like to be able to take on. Also, projects that engage with new themes in a changing world and new zones of human activity. This is a project by Faculty of Art Rich Pell. It's called the Center for Post-Natural History, and it's the world's only museum of genetically modified organisms. We support this administratively. Rich has been collecting, Monsanto seeds, to be sure, but also some even stranger things. Mice that have been bred to be predisposed to getting cancer. Eggs that have been bred to contain vaccines for various kinds of flu. What you see here is a spider silk goat, which is a goat that was engineered, funded by the U.S. military, to produce spider silk in its milk. It has spider genes, yeah, and basically it's because spider silk is really tough stuff, right? It's like the strongest fiber, but the problem is spiders are really small, and you want more of it. So you engineer the goat, you take the milk, you run it through a strainer, you get spider silk, and then you get these spools of the stuff because you want like a better bulletproof vest or something. But Rich managed to get one and had it taxidermied. So this is really Freckles is I think the name. This is really this kind of project to kind of. Now, what's interesting about the Center for Post-Natural History, people come in and they really want to know, like, so is genetic engineering good or bad? They want to know, like, give me an answer. And he's really incredibly, there's like a studiedly neutral approach to it, because in fact, part of what the impact of humans on the world has been to genetically modify other life forms for tens of thousands of years. If you look at corn, or if you look at dogs, these are genetically modified. They just, they were genetically modified in much more long-term laboratories as we domesticated animals and plants to our will. So post-natural history is this kind of notion of the museums of natural history stop at a certain point. Here's where we take off and just present a kind of an examination of what people have done, what we have wrought towards our goals. The last project I'll show that we're working on is called the Moon Arts Project. Google has something called the X Prize, which is a large prize for the first non-governmental organization to get a robot to the moon, do some tricks. The CMU Robotics Institute has taken up the gauntlet to decide to do this, and they invited our lab to produce a series of artworks that would accompany the mission in a way to distinguish it from the moon missions of the 60s and 70s that were very successful but did not necessarily have a direct engagement with culture, only an indirect one. And so we'll be doing things like drawing tracks on the moon to create kind of long-term poetic artworks that will last a very long time. So I hope that gives an idea, and I guess, although we have very little money, we feel sort of the liberty to kind of take on challenging topics, and that's maybe that would go away if I had more money. I don't know yet. Thank you so much for having me here today.
So we have plenty of time for Q&A, but actually before we do Q&A, I don't know if I have to talk into the microphone for people to hear me. Before we do Q&A, I want to invite Golan and Wendy maybe up here, not only to take questions, but maybe if they have reactions to each other's presentations, because we got a couple of not necessarily competing ideas, but a variety of ideas on what interdisciplinarity is, how play maybe is involved in interdisciplinarity, how funds are involved in interdisciplinarity, and I just wanted to see if anybody has, these two speakers have reactions to each other before we open it up to Q&A from the audience.
I have a quick reaction, which is, obviously, being in academia, we are constantly seeking relationships with industry, and industry tells us that they want people who can work in interdisciplinary teams. Whereas, for example, I'm trying to create these sort of unique hybrid people who can do both design and computer science, who can do both work in the arts but also are highly technical. I know that a lot of part of what they need, as you articulated, was the experience of working in teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that as I noted, that we see some of the most interesting and successful enterprises, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, coming out of collaboration across these disciplines. And even when, we fund a fair amount of research at the Kauffman Foundation. In fact, one of my research colleagues is here, Yaz. Wave, Yaz. So I said if I get a hard research question, I'm throwing it his way. But and when we do that research, we often go outside of what you might think the business school would do. That law, engineering, social sciences, and such. So the teams are incredible from different. And what you're doing, I imagine you see an amazing amount of innovation and entrepreneurial thinking and enterprises that come out of that work. No?
Entrepreneurial. As I said, I kind of consider myself fortunate to not necessarily be given the problem of worrying about entrepreneurial work. My students are entrepreneurial in a very different way.
Right.
For me and for my students in arts and humanities, entrepreneurialism is more about being able to make their work known and present to a large number of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's a transformative experience for a student when they have a successful Kickstarter,
Mm-hmm.
or when they have a video that maybe burps a little bit online and goes a little bit viral, and,
Right.
and a student who maybe only had 50 people show up to their last exhibition at the local student gallery suddenly has 50,000 people who've seen something that they've done. And that can alter a student's life. I mean, it can lead to a career where they get jobs because they have this thing that people have seen. So it's a different kind of entrepreneurialism than necessarily starting a business, but it's about getting their work out there in ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we one of the things we struggle with is with the body of research we do. We always want it to have impact. We want to show impact and demonstrate that, and a lot of that is getting it out into the public, disseminating it, and trying to influence the way people think and act. So.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is on.
Thank you for both of your talks, by the way. This question sort of piggybacks off of one of your last comments about work getting out into the world and creating an impact. And it seems to me that one of the threads that ties together both of your modes of working is that kind of attempt to create an impact. And I think that in the first talk we heard that impact sometimes phrased in terms of impact in a market context. And Golan, you were sort of talking about having an impact in terms of cultural transformation. And I was wondering if you could talk about the similarities and differences between those two models of achieving impact.
To be sure, there's a place of significant overlap, right? If you make something that a lot of people want, you can also leverage it economically. I think there's places where they also pull apart, and where you can make things that everyone's talking about, but there's not much money in it, or things that sort of underlie the basic fabric of society that nobody's even aware of, like those scanners at supermarkets, and the sort of credit card tracking stuff. It's like technology you're just really not aware of, but sort of in the background.
Yeah. I also think, though, that a large amount of work that we do is aimed at transform people's mindsets about how to approach their life. And so if you look at how entrepreneurship has flourished over the last 10, 15 years, it's become like sort of it's in the water, right? It's like the cool, popular thing to do. And part of that is people are realizing it's an option, and it can mean a lot of different things. It can be approaching anything you want to do in your career entrepreneurially. There's a different mindset about having kind of that grit and perseverance and ability to kind of see things differently. And so part of what we do, I think, making an impact is just having people think differently about how to navigate their own destiny.
The other thing about making an impact, I mean, sometimes my students make fun of me because they think that that all I want them to do is to get more hits on their YouTube videos of documenting their projects. I mean, and then by that logic, something like Gangnam Style or Charlie Bit My Finger is like, a soaring work of staggering genius. And just because something has a lot of hits doesn't make it good. But it is an indication that people find it interesting, and I think it's obviously assessing impact, particularly for interdisciplinary work, particularly for work whose impact is not necessarily quantifiable, is a big problem in interdisciplinary work in general. And hits aren't everything, but they certainly can be one measure of the extent to which you're penetrating the consciousness of a lot of people.
So, thank you so much. There was a moment in your presentation during the clouds that I thought, oh, there's a reality. I don't even know how to think about impact. There's some kind of reality that's beyond the membrane of what I see as society, what I see as impact. There's a kind of, and I think it went to the first slide that you showed, which has to do with this longer view. And I'm wondering if either of you could just speak to what is happening as I think our definition of society and the public and our moment is sort of expanding. What is the society? Where is that?
You can take that one.
I mean, that the world itself is less defined about where it begins and ends.
It's really challenging to take a long view and a wide view simultaneously. I mean, one can make, you know, specific technical predictions. Kind of as a provocation, I often have my freshmen look at the Gartner hype cycle every year, which is this kind of depiction of what sorts of technologies are buzzy and which ones have sort of fallen into this trough of kind of diminished expectations, and which ones have become part of daily life already. And that's, you know, it's a first order decent pass at like where a certain slice of things are going, but that doesn't talk at all about how culture is transformed by that. It doesn't talk about how inequality or conflict in the world are shaped by some of those things. You know, I don't consider myself a futurist professionally. I follow, you know, people who are, like Bruce Sterling, and you know, you can get a pretty good, although potentially kind of grim, view of the future if you do follow folks like Bruce Sterling and others who can kind of connect the dots and show you where things are heading if you're willing to have a kind of a stark look at challenges that we're all facing. You know, whether various kinds of, you know, whether it's conflict or environmental or the confluence of the two. You know, I don't want to get all grim, but you know, there's you know, the world's it's a complex and challenging place. Actually, I'm realizing, you know, Ben pulled up an old biography for me, and my work's now shifting towards more useful stuff, away from poetics. Partially because I see that the world is in fact such a challenging and complex and kind of place with real human needs. So the work that I'm doing now is actually funded by Knight Foundation, and it's somewhere between data journalism and computer vision, helping people who don't necessarily have access to powerful computer vision tools to use satellite imagery to help understand their world in ways that maybe haven't been made available to them before. I'm not doing it for money. I'm doing it for NGOs, and humanitarian interests, and citizen scientists. But it's sort of, I would say, non-poetic but utilitarian work that sort of I can see needs to be done and that I have the skills to do. So sometimes it's a matter of matching skills to needs, and I feel like I've suddenly grown up and said, oh my God, there's all this need, and I can maybe do a little thing to help. But understanding what those needs are is something where you sort of have to look at who's connecting those dots, and I follow the work of, like I said, Bruce Sterling, for example, to kind of understand that.
I have a question to Golan about the interdisciplinary collaboration. It's, you know, relatively easy to say let's do it. It's very difficult to, you know, about like how do you exactly do it. So as you run the lab and center, what kind of culture do you create, and you know, what kind of values do you try to create? And you know, if you try to do it with the students, that's, you know, one kind of people. Do you have any implications if you know, if the KU or, you know, other places try to do it at the university level? What kind of implications do you have?
Well, like, as I kind of indicated, I try to fly under the radar as much as possible, and it's kind of a move in which by not having a lot of money actually buys me a lot of rope. You know, I feel bad for people who have a lot of money, because it's very rare that you have a lot of money and with it a lot of freedom about how you can spend that. So, you know, in terms of the culture that I create, with almost no resources, it's a culture that I think artists are accustomed to working in, which is one where you have to be very scrappy and kind of economical and thoughtful and collaborative and you know, willing to help and share. One of the things that I'm really connected to is this culture of sort of so-called open source arts engineering tools, and I use my lab to support these, and we also use them a lot ourselves. It turns out that the tools that people use to program and make software, like the kinds of tools made by large companies like Microsoft Visual Studio, are not particularly artist-friendly. Maybe that surprises you, maybe not. And these kinds of tools were never really made for artists, young people, people from the humanities, and other people who didn't already have technical foundations to learn how to make software. So the notion that that one could make software and not come from a technical discipline, or rather, the notion that computer scientists are the ones, I'm going to piss off someone in this room, the notion that computer scientists are the ones who sort of ought to have the monopoly on teaching programming is, I think, really a really false notion, or a destructive one. I think computer science is a venerable discipline. I think programming is a 21st century skill that every single discipline can articulate in a way which is idiomatically relevant for it. And what I've discovered is, artists need to teach themselves programming, humanitarians need to teach themselves programming in ways that are idiomatically relevant. And for that to happen, we've sort of needed to make our own tools. And so what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years is that artists who know how to code, and there's only not that many, have sort of gotten together and say, we're fed up with the tools produced by industry. We're going to make our own tools. And to do that, they've had to rely on the open source movement. And the open source movement is so committed to sharing in the most generous possible way and sort of helping people pick themselves up by the bootstraps that I try to infuse that into our space. Although I have almost no money, I have amazing tools because I have dozens of people all around the world who are producing my tools with and for me, and I can leverage the open source community in that way to do things that would otherwise cost a great deal to do. The entire budget of Clouds was under $100,000, all told, and the software that was used to make it was all completely free. I mean, it's just the kind of thing where we to produce work like that, you have to find other ways. And since artists don't have a lot of money, they rely on each other. And so we've sort of piggybacked, I would say, the open source arts engineering movement to give ourselves great tools to work with that allow us to work in ways that seem quite technically sophisticated. So maybe that's one thing I would say. Again, it's a weird way to say, like, not having money can be an advantage, but it can allow you to think in ways that force you to not just have the luxury of pulling stuff off the shelf.
Check. There we go. So I wonder if I might use some of one of the terms that Golan used as a matrix to ask Wendy a question. So one of the little slide rule you had, where it was, I think it was like collecting knowledge or
producing knowledge,
and I can't remember influencing culture. So I'm a Shakespeare scholar. I study 16th and 17th century English literature. And so I'm probably more on the left-hand side of that little slide, right? So I do a lot of production of knowledge about the period, this historical period. And one of the frustrations I have and questions I continually go around is, how can I go from knowledge production to a kind of influence? How can I use this sort of knowledge that is really interesting and exciting to sort of do things in the present moment? So Wendy, I wonder if you have any experience thinking about, like, entrepreneurs, the people that you work with. What kinds of things do people do when they're knowledge producers to get to move to that other side of the slide rule, or if that makes any sense?
Well, maybe not even. I won't even take it from the entrepreneur aspect, but the research we do at the foundation is intended to change policy or change the education environment or what have you. And so we're always looking for ways to translate that in ways that are relevant to, think about what your end goal is. And so we try to be really inventive about that. We use digital media to do some really interesting things with video, and we have a series called Kaufman Sketchbooks, where it's animated videos, drawing, and it's a way to get a complicated message boiled down into something very simple and entertaining to watch. And so I think it's a matter of finding interesting ways to translate what might be complex material that you don't think people don't think they care about, in ways that make it interesting and relevant for them. I don't know if that answers your question, but that we deal with that all the time. We probably have a $10 million research budget, and it's intended to do something to inform people, and so that's a big part of what Yaz and others are doing at the foundation, is finding ways to make that research and the insights relevant so it can actually influence people.
I keep thinking, in answer to your question, Jonathan, is I've recently seen several studies of social network analyses of Elizabethan England. One based on letters that were carried back and forth among major operators in the Protestant Reformation. Did you see that one? And another one, which is done by a fellow at CMU, about Bacon and Shakespeare and all. That's the one. Yeah, no, that's correct. And what's interesting is, there's a ton of data that you might care about just because you really like reading Shakespeare's sonnets. But there's also a lot of data in there that can shed light on who we are now, even now. And so, for example, this network analysis of the Protestant Reformation, the powers that were at the time were really interested in quelling the Protestant Reformation. They killed the sort of obvious top people. But in fact, the Reformation continued and survived because primarily women, I think, who were sort of letter carriers, and a few others who were sort of like these like lesser known figures, but who sort of did all the kind of work in the background and were connectors to help sort of usher letters back and forth and recopy letters to help sort of keep this thing alive. I just felt like that particular study had a lot of lessons for how people organize themselves that were applicable and kind of inspirational to thinking about management or thinking about how people work today. That's not any different from how people were, 400 years ago. Yeah.
How important do you think it is to have a physical space so that the 1 million cups, for example, might have a physical digital space on campus like the studio for each of you? How important do you think it is to have a common space where some of this work and collaboration can happen? I think it's really important. I think what we've learned in looking at sort of the entrepreneurial ecosystems in cities, it's that connections matter, and there's only so much you can do online. There's nothing that replaces that face-to-face contact, and I think that's why 1 million cups that I reference is so successful. It's totally an old school idea. When you think about it, it's like people coming together and talking. And we find that time and time again in communities that when people come together to connect and there's those collisions with different perspectives, that's when the magic kind of happens.
But teasing the part further, you said something very interesting, right? You said, looking at cities. I'm a big fan of Jane Jacobs, and she talks about how people collide in cities because of pedestrian walkways. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to propose 1 million cups of coffee. My university has just done something almost identical. They want to have undergraduates have a paid lunch with a faculty member, and to kind of so that they can see paths towards the future. And for the amount of money that my university is now spending on paying all these undergraduates to have a free lunch with a professor, I think they could actually apply it in a very different way, which is to actually get students working in labs in spaces where they sort of mix with professors all the time. And in this case, I'm inspired by my own undergraduate education, where we had an undergraduate research program that subsidized undergraduates to work with faculty regardless of discipline. And it's a different thing to sort of say, here's some money to have a cup of coffee together, than it is to say, here's a space where there's reasons for people to collide with each other, where they might meet people who are not the same as themselves. And this doesn't have to be a coffee space, right? In our university, there was one fellow who ran a machine shop, and we have like a lot of big universities. We've got a lot of different kinds of fabrication spaces on campus, and for the longest time they were all sort of balkanized in these highly siloed ways. So the mechanical engineering would have their machine shop, and chemical engineering would have their machine shop, and we ended up having 4 different wood shops in the College of Fine Arts alone. One for design, one for architecture, one for art, and one for drama, in fact, so they could build their sets. And the opportunities for people to actually, meet each other over a table saw, let alone a cup of coffee, were missed because of the way that we simply failed to have kind of common spaces for sort of similar activities. So I would say having a space is really important. It's great if you want to, make it a social space or, support, people to eat together. That's a basic human function. But finding ways in which people who are working and who are working on different things can nevertheless be working on those different things in the same place is a really great goal, I think.
Hi, my name is Joe. I'm from the University of Kansas in Kansas City, also known as the Edwards campus. And we do host the 1 Million Cups event there every Wednesday morning. So love to have you come over if you want to sometime. We actually, for those of you that don't know it, it streams in the live video from the main location, and then we also have afterwards, conversation following and networking, that sort of thing. So thought I'd put in a little commercial plug and invite you guys to come on over to that too. But my question, it was kind of a theme I thought that went through both of your speeches, but I didn't actually hear the word, and I love the word because I've been an entrepreneur, actually went to 1 Million Cups several years ago, recently came to KU so that I could be an intrapreneur, somebody that works for somebody else but does the out-of-the-box thinking and trying to network and do different things. I was wondering if either one of you would like to address that topic, intrapreneur.
Sure. I mean, it's something that I think that, not everybody's cut out to go on their own and do their own venture. And so, but I can't imagine someone who doesn't want to think entrepreneurial or be creative or make a difference wherever you end up having your career. So it's and we often find that people, the average, kind of a myth out there is that the average entrepreneur is a 22-year-old, college dropout or what have you, but the average age of an entrepreneur is 40 in this country, and they have come from, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, they've had some sort of experience in the workplace, doing things, and then they see opportunities to maybe do it differently or better, and they strike out on their own. But I think corporations are struggling with how to make their workforce more entrepreneurial so that they can innovate and stay ahead of the game. So it's really important.
For me, the term intrapreneur, which I haven't heard before, but I'll run with it, is more, it seems to me, more about acting as an agent of internal change to kind of break down divisions that may have ossified. And so, for example, I spend a lot of my time trying to literally punch holes in walls, build sky bridges where there were none before, sometimes literal, sometimes metaphorical, but basically to produce new contexts in which opportunities can arise. And it's not quite the same thing as it's actually I mean it's related, but it's about being an agent of internal change because you want to repair the institutions that you find yourself within. Yeah.
We need some in government.
Great. Golan and Wendy, my name is Mahesh Das. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture, Design and Planning here. Just wanted to say, really enjoyed both of your talks. They're very stimulating and very inspiring. And I think they set a perfect stage for us to realize that, or keep in mind, that curiosity is far more important than certainty. And that's what drives all of our work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.